Welcome to LCS Talks. I'm Berkley Glazer, and I'm the principal of the middle school here at Langley Christian School. I have Kevin Mirchandani, my co-host with me today, and Kevin is the Director of Instruction for K-12.
Hey, everyone.
Awesome. We have Joel Ditson with us today, who is our high school principal.
Hi, everyone. Excited to be here.
And we have Chris Seppelt with us, who is the coordinator of service learning and a high school Bible teacher.
Happy to be here.
Awesome. Kevin, what's happening today?
Yeah, Berkley, another great episode here on LCS Talks. We are in this season of looking at social emotional learning and faith formation. And for our listeners here, we're talking about how we engage in our local to global context, how we engage service learning, particularly in the high school, and the kind of impact that a service learning program can have on a Christian learning community. I personally have been impacted by facilitating service learning experiences. In my previous role, I've been impacted in the learning experiences that I've had locally to internationally. And I know many families have been asking us when we started to develop our Bible curriculum, how service learning would fit in the work that we're doing curricularly and as a community. And so in direct response to our strategic plan and the needs that we've seen in our community, and just this desire for us to continue to grow as a community of faith, we have decided to move forward this past year with hiring Mr. Seppelt, Mr. Chris Seppelt here, in that service learning coordinator role, and to build out a thriving program where students are going to be engaged in local to global context, invest in service learning, building partnerships and relationships, and seeing the work that God is doing in other organizations to shape this community and for this community to be a part of the shaping and reconciliation work in the world. So really excited to connect with Joel and with Chris today. And it's going to be a great conversation about service learning, why it is such a formative part of our social emotional development, but why it also is vital to a community of faith that's seeking to build relationships and have people impact us as much as we are able to impact the community at large around us. So that's a little bit of what I'm excited about today in this episode. Berkley,
awesome.
Back over to you.
Great. So, Chris, you're new to our community this year. So help our listeners get to know you a little bit and share a little bit about who you are.
Great. Well, again, thank you for having me. So I grew up in Port Moody and to a immigrant German family, refugees. And, we weren't particularly well-to-do. It was always like wait to payday. And, so money was always a little bit scarce. But, it was funny. We were at church one Sunday, and there was an appeal to support a refugee family from Vietnam. And I remember sitting next to my dad, and he opened up his wallet. And, my dad's a pretty frugal guy. And all of a sudden, he took out a large sum of money and put it in the envelope. And for me, it was something I never forgot. Because, as being newcomers to the country, they really felt that this was something important to, I was a stranger and you welcome me. And so that sense of responsibility, because they saw themselves in those who came after them. And I remember just sitting there watching this, thinking, oh, wow, this is a really powerful moment. And so, Matthew 25 always had a really important part in my idea of, living the Christian faith. I was hungry and you fed me, thirsty, you gave me drink. Mm-hmm. So that sort of became my mantra. I'd be downtown with my friends and I'd see a panhandler and it was just something that became almost like a sort of a reflex motion. And just sort of instinctive, as an action of this is what it means to live your Christian faith. And so I was a student in grade 12 at Vancouver College, and a teacher invited me to serve a meal on the downtown east side. And so, just making these early connections to service, they were quite formative in their own way. So that's a bit of my early story.
Yeah, awesome, Chris. I wonder if we could hear a little bit more about you, get to know you a bit better. What are some other key moments throughout your formation that has impacted your faith development?
Yeah, so I've been a teacher for the past 30, 35 years. Mm-hmm. And so I was a founding faculty member at an independent school in Port Coquitlam. Mm. And, when you're starting a school from scratch, essentially you're kind of building elements of the school. And we didn't really have a service program. It was never sort of a view to, engage something in a practical way. And here I was taking a group of students to go on an art and culture trip to New York City. Mm-hmm. And I remember being on the subway with my students, and there was a transient fellow on the subway. And it was a real tragic scene. This fellow had passed out and he had urinated himself. And my students looked, they were focused on this fellow. And one of my students took out a camera and took a picture and thought, oh, this is my scene of New York. And it really troubled me. Mm-hmm. I thought, I instantly felt I was a fraud of an educator. I felt, okay, I'm teaching the kids about how to appreciate art and culture, which are important things. Mm-hmm. But, their ability to respond appropriately to a fellow human being, a child of God, in an appropriate manner, to me, was something that I had not yet done. Mm-hmm. So I immediately reached out to the Doors Open Soup Kitchen on the downtown east side, and that became my mission to sort of bridge that gap. And so that was a journey that began 23 years ago, right?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate you sharing that. I think you've set up a bit of that theological foundation, a biblical foundation as well, too, of course, in terms of how Jesus engaged with people. And just even hearing those moments where you encountered God working and seeing the personhood of the people in the situation, I think that's really what we want to see. Not only an awakening for our students of what's going on in the world, but also and understanding that Jesus sees people and he notices people. And we've spoken quite a few times on our podcast of Jesus's interactions with a wide range of people, marginalized in society, in the Jewish kind of context as well too. And even just coming into your class, seeing some of your Old Testament conversations, Chris, it's encouraging to hear about how you're building into our Bible curriculum and the work that we're doing as well too. So yeah, excited to hear more from you and where the service learning program is going.
Oh, excited to be here.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Joel, you were the primary visionary for the whole concept of service learning. So I'm wondering if you could take us through some of those early plans for service learning in the high school.
Sure. That's the primary visionary. I don't know all of that, but there's, I think as we were looking back at among the high school, and of course, Berkley, this with the middle school, and Kevin as well too, we have different sets of plans. We have strategic plans, we have action plans that we're working on, and ways that we're trying to move the school and in doing so, our students' experience and how we're able to help them learn, help them transform, help them grow in all different facets of their school life. That those goals and those strategies kind of feed forward into what we do next. Mm-hmm. So when we're thinking of those things, and service is an area that's shown up in our planning for a couple years now, and just we hadn't moved quite yet on it. So this, I remember talking with Kevin at the beginning of the year, last year in 2022-23, and kind of coming up with 3 big goals that we were looking at as kind of, here's some game changers. Can we execute some of these? Can we move these forward in the next year? And service was one of those. Can we work on creating global and community partnerships in our school, which is one of our strategic goals as a school? Can we expand opportunities for innovation and transformative learning for our students in the school? Can we help support their wellness, their well-being? Foster some growth and provide them with opportunities to encounter, as kind of Chris mentioned, individuals outside of their familiar circles, so that The story you shared, Chris, is almost a perfect example of a student encountering someone on that subway outside of their familiar circle, and not viewing them as a person, and viewing them as an object, to be photographed in that way. So I think that's kind of where we started with the conversation, and we were able to move on it, I think, fairly quickly because of it already being part of our plans moving forward. And I think we're on track there to hit some of those goals, as well as providing those opportunities for kids.
Yeah, Joel, maybe tell us a little bit more about how we're envisioning that program. What are kind of some of the key drivers of how we've thought about framing the program locally to globally? What are ways that we're thinking through the kind of experiences that we want students to have? And then Chris, we'll have you jump in and add maybe some more descriptions of some of the things that we're doing already in the last 2.5 months or so with the early kind of phases of our service learning program.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, yeah. As key goals go, I think something that we've talked about, that especially Chris, you and I talked about a lot as we explored this early last year, kind of in what it could look like and how we'd go, is collaborating together with groups, with partnerships locally. Preferably, we've kind of moved within Langley, within the Fraser Valley, some down into Vancouver, into the Lower Mainland area. But that we're working together to serve a cause and meet a need in our community, and that really ensuring as a goal that we are, as an organization, building long-standing partnerships with the groups that we're partnering with. I guess I don't know how to say that better, but there's probably a way. But that these are long-standing, and they're not, as we term it, say, parachuting in and dropping in and kind of service provider, service receiver. We're really, really working to avoid that type of environment. We want it to be, I think, Chris, you've used this word a lot, a kinship.
Yeah. So those fellowship relationships are critical to this becoming something that facilitates looking beyond this from a distance. And, we want to look at experiences that provide meaningful opportunities for dialogue. So this past week, I was with Bruce Wergelin's First Peoples class of students. And so we were serving a meal at the doors open. And, I really, we challenge the students to, it's not about the food that we serve. It's the way you serve it, right? It's opportunity to engage in dialogue. And, many of the students, they were right engaged in that. And so, when we were debriefing, having this sort of discussion afterwards, many of the students, they were really taken with, hey, that guy has a degree, this guy, he's from Alberta and he's got 2 kids. And, so all of a sudden, the stereotypes, they fade away and you see the person. And so, and that's transformative. It's both for the person who's on both sides, right?
Yeah. Chris, tell us a little bit more about some of the early partnerships that we have, moving maybe perhaps locally to our international experience in the States, and a little bit of what we're planning so far this year in our first year of building the program.
Well, thanks to you, we made a connection to Avalon Gardens, a seniors facility right here in Murrayville. And so we've connected with them on about 5 or 6 different occasions, where, like a Terry Fox walk, arts and crafts activity, a Halloween fellowship, and then in a few weeks we're going to bring some students from the elementary school to sing Christmas carols. And this is something I think students need to see. Service happens right here. Right? It's Mother Teresa's line, Calcutta is everywhere if you have eyes to see, and it really has to be seen as something that starts within our school, but then, in our own community. And so the second placement is Surrey Urban Mission. And I was looking for an agency that did facilitate that opportunity for dialogue, and something that was relatively close by, something that, gave students a sense that this problem is close by, right? Folks are falling through, society's cracks, unfortunately, in larger numbers. And so we've been able to make about 5 or 6 visits already to Surrey Urban Mission. And it's a wonderful faith-based Christian service organization. And then the other is The Door is Open on the downtown east side facing Oppenheimer Park. And, that's kind of in the epicenter of, a well-established area of the poorest postal code in Canada, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there the students see, high concentration of the problems facing us in the local context.
Mm-hmm.
And a place that, allows us to come in, to prepare, to serve, and to, really engage in meaningful dialogue. So, and to come in with large numbers, which is also beneficial, right? We want to provide as many opportunities for our students to partake in this opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we're planning a learning experience to the Bronx in New York. Tell us a little bit about what that's looking like for us this year.
Yeah. A part of my educational journey took me to New York City, where I completed a master's degree in religious studies. And while I was there, this was in the early 90s. And so I was really unfamiliar with just the scale of poverty was so alarming. And so I really didn't want to sort of, learn in this sort of ivory tower. And so a couple of nights a week, I volunteered at a homeless shelter as a resident volunteer. And so it gave me an opportunity to sort of connect with some of the residents, in this homeless facility in the South Bronx. And, that was arguably as meaningful as that which I studied for my master's degree.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I came back to the Lower Mainland, this both living in New York and having, engaged some of these social problems,
Mm-hmm.
I thought this sort of stuck with me. And so as our students kind of went from grade 8 to grade 11 and 12, this now took me back to doing that trip to New York, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a city that I became familiar with. So I thought, well, why don't I take my familiarity with this city
Mm-hmm.
and then develop a sort of a service-related program to engage these deeper issues.
Mm-hmm.
And so one day about, I think it was 2006,
Mm-hmm.
I picked up this book called Ordinary Resurrections by Jonathan Kozol, which described the lives of children
Mm-hmm.
growing up in the poorest congressional district in the United States. And so I happened to be in New York with my wife on our 10th anniversary. And so I thought, I got to check this place out. So I knocked on the door unannounced. And I just said, hi, I'm Chris. I'm a teacher in Vancouver. And I would love to take my kids here and, engage some fellowship and outreach. And the woman who is the pastor of the church said, who is described in detail in this book, said that would be wonderful.
Mm.
And so I was just amazed at the opportunity which all of a sudden was opening up. And over the years, I think I've taken about 800 students there. And I think there's, last count, about 90 students who have gone back on their own.
Mm.
And to continue this relationship with the children that they connect with over the course of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so come March, I'm going to be taking about 40 LCS students in grade 11 and 12 on a fellowship service experience where we're going to be connecting with kids in this after-school program and also a local elementary/middle school.
Mm-hmm. You've really highlighted the importance of learning being possible with relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And as I think about it, we're talking about issues of homelessness and poverty. We're looking at issues that perhaps elderly folks face as well too. We're exploring other opportunities as well with the environment. And we're trying to broaden our understanding of what service learning can reach into and where the Spirit can work in communities in terms of restoration. I was thinking about, as I was growing up, my mother always had elderly folks around our home. I honestly think back to being 4 years old and remember everyone was our grandparent, and I couldn't tell the difference between who was an auntie and an uncle, and all that just kind of wrapped up in family, and just realized how impactful that was when you see the experiences and perspectives of others and how formative that can be to us as well. And so even my mother today just has such a heart for the elderly folks, and I've learned so much from her in the work that she's doing. And I think we learn a lot from people and their experiences when it comes to how they have related to different people groups and the issues and the kind of experiences that they face as well.
Well, yeah, it's seeing God in all things. And I remember hearing a pastor give us a homily where he was talking about visiting this fellow who is in his last days, and he was on his deathbed. And he witnessed this tender interaction between his this fellow who was dying and his wife. And he knew this couple for many years, and they didn't always have the easiest relationship. In fact, he could be a very difficult fellow, but he saw a side of this man in his infirmity. And then all of a sudden he said, it's like a leaf where it becomes more beautiful just before it dies. And I just remember being struck by, how poignant and how truthful that was. That, and I'm seeing my father in his own journey, and he's blind and he's, barely able to walk, and just journeying with him every day. But, just seeing that sense of gratitude, as I put the, shaving him or changing him or whatever. And it's just, it's offered me a glimpse as to where, in a sense, how we attain our own salvation is how we respond to the people closest to us.
Yeah, that's a pretty beautiful theological truth, right?
Yeah.
We could talk about the incarnation. Christmas is coming up here. God becomes humanity, and it's the great act of empathy. And that's really what we're trying to introduce our students into, to see, to experience what it's like to be someone else.
To add to that, like I find in some traditions, families will place the manger, and I remember, thinking about this recently, thinking, many of them are sanitized, and we don't get a sense of that this was a family that was afraid, that the fear, the sense that these are refugees, and I think we need to challenge our community, ourselves, myself, to understand how Christ's presence, is really before us in the needy, and to challenge our students, all of us, to see how Christ's presence is before us, especially during this time of Christmas.
I think if I can jump in here for a second, some of what Chris, I've specifically seen this year, and we talked a lot about this in the last year as we move towards this plan of facilitating these ongoing relationships, collaborative, based in mutual respect with the various groups. And I think as I just was listening to kind of go through, it was a little while back, but going through some of the organizations that we're connecting with as a school and some of the people, I love that the focus over and over and over with those groups has been on developing that relationship over time, and that, service, sometimes people hear about it or think about it, or we hear and we think it's as simple as putting 25 students on a bus and dropping them off somewhere to complete some task work. And then they disappear out of that world and they come back to us, and that's their service experience. I think it's just, from hearing, your stories here and Kevin, it's so much deeper than that. And the method of kind of melding that around biblical studies curriculum and how our students' classroom experiences are preparing them to have the empathy that you've just kind of been talking about, to go into the world and serve others in an honest and genuine way. Right, that's just it. Every time we chat through the year, it just comes through over and over that this is being imparted to our students as they take part in these experiences.
Yeah, I think the myth is that you're coming to bring Christ to them. In fact, I think it could be the other way around. That I find that, in people's brokenness, that there's, I think the students on a recent group were pointing this out. They said there are so many of the guests are saying, God bless you, and, making these religious observations. And I said, yeah, because, when you hit rock bottom, sometimes, there's a certain grace that can come from that experience. So if you are able to sort of listen to that person's journey, it can be very humbling. I have a line that I often use. It's, don't judge people in how they carry their burdens, but be in awe of the burdens they carry. And, to kind of, just to be able to offer a person a sense of, as in the Wayfinder program that we just completed, sort of lean in and go forward to understand and be curious to someone's story. And, and I think that should be an approach that we all take towards each other, before saying, oh, I know what you want. There's a story I just want to share with you quickly. I remember being involved in a service outreach in Port Coquitlam, and where there was a homeless population that was congregated around City Hall in downtown Poco. And there was a fellow I connected with. He was there every week. And, as Christmas approached, I thought, it was someone I was getting to know and really enjoying a certain friendship. And so I said to him, Julio, what do you want for Christmas? I thought, I'll offer something. And I thought in my mind, this is what you need. Probably a blanket, probably a jacket, right? He said to me, I need a cell phone. And I thought, okay, my judgment crept in, and I said, that seems a little bit of an indulgence, don't you think? Like that. I was like, And so I thought, all right, well, I'm going to get him a cell phone. So I went out and got one of these paper, use things or whatever. Next week, okay, here you go. Here's your cell. Okay, so after Christmas, I saw him again. I missed him for a few weeks. All of a sudden, he looked awful. He looked like next to death. And I said to him, I said, Julio, what happened? And he said, well, he was out sleeping in the park, and these fellows just thought, the thing to do would be to kick this person near to death. And he said he took out his cell phone, he called 911. He knew that this could be the thing that could potentially save his life. And when he told me this, I actually felt ashamed because I had judged him, like I thought I didn't listen. I didn't lean in and hear his story and to think, and that's the type of dialogue that I think we need to have, with people to really understand, what is it that we all need, right? And I think, to facilitate that discussion in a classroom context and in those service agencies, I really think, this would enrich us as well as the guests.
Absolutely. That's a great connection between perceived reality and true reality. And just by getting out there and being with people, that can definitely help bring that to fruition in terms of what is actually happening. Chris, you've made reference to social emotional development a couple of times. Can you just elaborate for us on how service learning can shape our social emotional development?
Well, there's service, and then there's what you do in the classroom. I think it's greater than the sum of its parts, right? And so when you're able to have that experience that a student may have participated in recently, and be present to that discussion that they may have had. And all of a sudden you're teaching to the historical and social and economic issues. All of a sudden you see these lights go on, right? And you see students all of a sudden making these connections. And that's a really powerful thing. In terms of, their social, emotional well-being, I think what has the last few years taught us that, when we sort of, and I know it's a controversial issue, but I mean, we needed to sort of, practice social distancing, but that came at a heavy price, right? Especially to our young people. And we need to repair those connections to each other locally, but, to our own wider communities, because, the ones who were affected, I think two groups that were profoundly affected by the pandemic in terms of social emotional well-being are students and the marginalized whose volunteers all of a sudden fell by the wayside, right? And so I think it's really important to sort of revive those connections, for the well-being of both parties, right? But the learning piece though has to be a part of it, and I think that's what drew me to this position here, where it wasn't two worlds, separate, which I think unfortunately happens too often. You see these service experiences happening in isolation, and you need my job is to connect those points and to build those connections between what they're learning in their courses, be it psychology or be it history, right, or social justice.
Totally. Yeah. And you've provided some pretty amazing opportunities already, Chris, in terms of connecting classroom teachers to context. I often talk about with our Bible teachers this movement of context, text, context. I think in the same way when it comes to learning in our school community, where we want this really rich moral and ethical kind of formation, it's really hard to do that when we are just putting out theoretical spaces for kids to make ethical decisions. And it's a lot more like now we have access to a child and what they're experiencing in the context as they're seeing it unfold in their lives. So when you're out there and they're having conversations with one another about other people's decision making and how could it be that someone would end up in a particular circumstance like homelessness, or what perhaps even an elderly individual might be experiencing in terms of issues around loneliness, and how they might actually process that and make sense of it. I think what we're starting to do as a community is think about how our faith impacts that ethical formation and that social emotional development piece too. So I think it gives us that context, and then when we're back in the classroom, we actually understand what the issues are before we continue to apply that into our different spaces. And hopefully we're equipping students. That's our intention, to be a place where students are equipped to have these conversations and to also have agency with the partnership of the Spirit to be a reconciliatory kind of agent in the world too. And I think that's a really big part of the work that we're doing as a school community.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Martin Luther King had a line. He says, "Church is not a place you go to, but it's a place you come from." And, so I do think that we, ought to be connecting and to experiencing. And because, sometimes we maybe fill in the narrative and in a way that that often isn't truthful, to the wider experience of what people are facing. And, if we look deeper, we find something of ourselves there. We can identify with our own brokenness, our own struggles with certain elements in our lives, and realize that we're not far off from this place. I've had former students come through the door. The door's open, and that's a troubling, circumstance where you realize that we're not far off ourselves. This is not a population, completely other. It's us.
Thanks, Chris. Joel, would love to hear from you in terms of the work that we are doing with service learning. How do we encourage our families to think about supporting service learning, thinking about this partnership that we have with our school community, the opportunities that we have to develop our students' faith, to develop their social emotional capabilities? What encouragement would you share with families to partner in this program development effort?
Yeah, I think I'm really excited to see what I've seen so far and what's happening. And I think the most important thing any of our families can do is continue to reflect and support for their students that this service learning is an opportunity for meaningful impact, and not an obligation that I need to do, but it's something that we continue doing because of who we are and because of what we're called to do in the world. And I remember Chris sharing with me some stories of past students. One in particular I remember early on, where I believe the student had shared with you, the first time I came because I had to.
Yeah.
The next time I came because I wanted to.
Yeah.
And I think as we are in these early stages, sometimes we go through some growing pains, new programs, new changes. It can make us wonder if it's something that we want to do. And I know one encouragement definitely would be, just approaching service learning as an opportunity for meaningful impact that LCS as a school can have in our community. Encouraging children, students to find areas within there as we cultivate and more experiences, more opportunities in different places. Also finding areas that align with their passions, that their giftings, and where they can dive in and be part of that service opportunity. Open to the new experience, the new people that we're serving. That's as I think you shared this already, Chris, it's as much about our learning as it is about helping, right? And and how it's helping us as well too. So I think that openness, and I think I mentioned this just right at the start, but as a way to embody our faith as well as a Christian school, that we are, embodying those Christian values and doing this work in our communities here.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Just to get our listeners thinking a little bit here, we are starting our service learning program, I probably mentioned in the beginning, in the high school. And we've identified that as a key place of our starting journey, really connected to our Bible curriculum. This is something we've been talking about for the last 2 years as we've introduced our new Bible curriculum. And then we're also going to be doing some thinking about what this program looks like in the middle school and the elementary school. And we've got lots of teachers doing a number of really good work in service learning, and we want to be a school community that's also unified. So I'll go back to our theme passage this year from Romans 12:5. In Christ, there's belonging. Many members, we have distinct gifts. But we're one body and we're unified. And that passage, I think, is a way to think as a school community, a Christian learning community that is building a program. Like you said, Joel, some growing pains as we figure out who our partnerships are, how we can keep this learning purposeful, connected to the curriculum, connected to not only that question of impact, but being responsive to the impact on us as a community, a community of faith that's always continuously learning. And then also just thinking about how this program fits from K to 12 as we equip students to be able to experience God's world in unique ways, to see different contexts. And I think this also has intercultural value. I think it impacts us in how we see people. It impacts the way that we think about ourselves and our identity. And I think it also encourages us to be people who are reflective as we engage in different moments of this purposeful kind of discomfort, as we see and experience the world differently and different perspectives impact us. We want to be a community that not only thinks about different perspectives, but does it from a faithful Christian and biblical kind of approach. So this has been a really great conversation to hear about some of the vision and some of the early stages of the work that's happening, and would love to, even at a later point, maybe we'll do another talk and update our community on some of the work that's been done and hear from students on the impact that our program is having on them.
Yeah, I already, the feedback has been quite affirming. There was a colleague whose son was along on a trip this past Monday. And she came to see me, walked right up to me afterwards. And we had spoken before. And she said, my son was along. And she said, we used to serve at our church. And it was so meaningful. And then, then there was a part of the story that she didn't share. And then she said, thank you. And there was like tears in her eyes. And she said, this has really, really affected my son. And I'm like, she goes, thank you. And I said, no, thank you. Because these things, the seed is planted at home, and I think what happens is those discussions, around the dinner table, or in the drive down the road to soccer practice, the comments that are made, kids hear those, right? And then, so that's what I find. The parents are the greatest educators of their children. And so, if there's that sort of sense of implicit compassion, then students will be inclined to, embrace those opportunities as they become available. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we just, as we wrap it up here, we just want to really thank our panel for being here today. Chris, Joel, great conversation. It's been just great just to reflect on really getting to do things and to serve and just be a real light in our community. So hopefully we can reflect on that more. We just want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And we value your input and just want to remind you that if you have any questions you'd like to or comments you'd like to share with us, you can reach out to our email, podcast@langleychristian.com. And we thank you for tuning in.